Greetings, and welcome. Welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. We are grateful and humbled that you have chosen to join us here today. And as is tradition with Atlas Info, we are putting the link into the chat, and it should it's there on screen if you wish to participate in today's conversation. Today's discussion was born out of a week-long experience of one encounter after another, of facing the stonewalling, avoiding, evasive, and insidious expressions of self-deception in others. And so subtle and clever and diverse were these various tactics on display in the minds of these individuals, which they were not aware of. They were completely oblivious to how their own minds were deceiving them and sabotaging them. That it became clear the topic of discussion for today had to be that. And in each and every one of these encounters, we did an appropriate amount of self-reflection and meditation on ourselves, on our eyes, on our I. Am I being deceived? Is my mind working to self-sabotage me in my efforts, in my pursuits, in my life's work, which is Atlas, the Atlas Project? And how does the self-deception of my mind come between me and my innermost being, Atlas? And how do the self-deceptions of my mind, spurred on by various egos, come between me and the work that we are here to do, Atlas and I, on behalf of Alux, the Logos? And so some of what we have to share today is based on our own experience in exploring ourselves. But this week in particular brought with it such a diverse plethora of mental gymnastics, which it was startling and illuminating, and we had to have an opportunity to share it with you, because perhaps your own mind engages in some of this mental gymnastics with you, preventing you from hearing messages which you need to hear, preventing you from seeing the truth of objective reality as you need to see it. And mental gymnastics which cause you to outright reject or react negatively, or evade and avoid. And what comes to mind is a game that we used to play as children in the schoolyard. The game did not have a very pleasant sounding name. We called it Murder Ball. And in Murder Ball, the point of the game is basically everybody would line up against a wall in the schoolyard. And the point of the game is someone would have a tennis ball or a rubber ball or some suitably soft or softer ball. Sometimes we would play with an Indian rubber ball, and if you know what that is, you know that it's not pleasant to be hit with an Indian rubber ball that's traveling at any reasonable velocity. We would never play with a hard ball or even a soft ball or like a baseball. We would never do that. But the point of the attacker, of course, is to hit individuals with the ball. And of course, if you're up against the wall, the point is to not get hit. And it's astonishing what the motor instinctive sexual brain is capable of. That's the brain of our physical body. It's astonishing, and it's the fastest of our three brains. It's astonishing what it's capable of to avoid pain or to accomplish some physical feat which we have assigned it. And the contortions and the movements and the evasions and the tactics and the strategies that are that the brain, which governs our physical body, is capable of doing. As fast as that brain is, it is not quite as sophisticated as our intellect, as our mental brain, the brain of our mental body. Because although the brain of our physical body is very intricate and sophisticated when it comes to the understanding and the management and movement of all the intricate aspects of the physical machine, it doesn't require sophistication of intellect. And because of that, the mental body, although slower in its reactions, and our emotional body, which likewise is faster than the mental body, but still slower than the physical body, those two brains of ours, the brain of the mental body and the brain of the emotional body, they combine and they work together to create similar elaborate contortions and evasions and strategies and tactics. Anything and everything that they possibly can to avoid pain. Just like we would, up against the wall, do whatever we needed to do to avoid getting hit by the ball. The mind will do anything and everything in its power to avoid getting hit with the truth. You are all, no doubt, well aware of the expression to shoot the messenger. And to one degree or another, we have all been there. We have all delivered a message to someone which they needed to hear. And we took it upon ourselves to deliver that truth. And for all of our good intentions and goodwill and effort on their behalf, we were met with, at best, skepticism, at worst, anger and resentment and blame, such that we were no longer just the messenger of the truth. We weren't just delivering the truth. We were somehow the cause of that truth. We were responsible for it somehow. We were to blame. Whatever pain or discomfort or or negative emotion, which sharing that truth triggered within the individual, they saw us as the cause of their pain and suffering. And they projected that pain and suffering on us. And they wished and willed for us to participate in their pain and suffering, because misery prefers company. We've all been there. And if we are honest with ourselves, we have all played the other role. We have all been in a situation at some point in our life where we received truth from a messenger, whoever that messenger was, and we reacted badly. And we lashed out at them for whatever discomfort, whatever pain, whatever expectation had not been met. Now it was their fault. Whereas they might just be the messenger, the harbinger of bad news. Now, it is very easy, especially in these modern times, to dismiss or label the shoot the messenger phenomenon as cognitive dissonance, which is at once a powerful expression, a useful expression, and in some levels, it's a descriptive expression. Although many people won't know what dissonance means. It's a word that's not used in general parlance. Cognitive dissonance, or disconnect, disharmony. Or silencing, to silence, to shut down, to shut up, to not receive. The root word of sonance is sound, sonic, vibration, and sound. And sonance, as an elaboration on that word, is to be in sonic vibration and in harmony. So dissonance is to shut down and avoid and prevent sonnets. It's to prevent those sonic waves, those sonic vibrations, that sound from fulfilling its destiny. And yes, so cognitive dissonance is descriptive and it is somewhat valuable. But what is behind the cognitive dissonance and how does it work? How does it function? And that's what we're after today. It's not enough to say, oh, he has cognitive dissonance, or I have cognitive dissonance, or that's just cognitive dissonance. Well, what is that? Cognitive dissonance is an effect. And every effect has a cause. So what is the cause? Likewise, if we go one step down, we can say, well, cognitive dissonance is a form, but only one form, of self-deception. Okay. Self-deception. I'm deceiving myself. That's what self-deception suggests or implies. But how does one go about doing that? What is the actual psychological mechanics, the metaphysical machinery at work that causes us to deceive ourselves? Because would anybody willingly and consciously deceive themselves? Does that make any sense? What do you have to gain by deceiving yourself? Now, coming back to our murder ball example, if your primary goal is the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, and the reception of bad news, the reception of a harsh truth causes you a great deal of distress, a great deal of pain, a great deal of suffering. Your worldview, your security, and your comfort is disturbed by the truth, then perhaps, yes, perhaps you will, on some level, actively deceive yourself. You will do anything you can to avoid that pain, to avoid the disturbance of your little world, your comfort and security, your little bubble, which you have constructed carefully over a lifetime. And you live your world inside your little bubble. It is a bubble of belief. It is a bubble of self-image. It is a bubble of contentment and comfort and security. You do not want your bubble disturbed. And you certainly don't want anybody to come around and burst your bubble. And if somebody does come and threatens to burst your bubble or disrupts your bubble, and you immediately, something inside of you immediately reacts to that disturbance as a potential threat, because someone who disturbs a bubble could very easily be packing a pin. It could very easily, this disturbance of our bubble could very likely be a prelude to a burst. The primary egos involved in the construction and protection of that bubble are fear and pride. Fear, of course, because the desire for comfort and security, the desire to control outcomes, the fear of outcomes other than those which we desire. This is a very innate primal instinct in all animals. And we've talked extensively about fear. Fear is responsible for the 4 primal instinctive responses to danger, to threat. Most people just talk about fight or flight. And yes, fight or flight are definitely ways in which all beings can react to threats. But there's also fake and fawn. There's 4 F words: fight, flight, fake, or fawn. Now, fake is something that, for example, a possum does, an opossum does. It goes limp. It plays dead, basically. Or we can be frozen by fear. We could be paralyzed with fear. And that's one and the same. It's a different type of expression. There have been many cases throughout history where someone facing danger, threat of their life, they found that the best strategy that they had in that precise moment was to play dead. As long as they could demonstrate that they weren't a threat to their enemy would just walk on by. They'd leave him alone. He's already dead. What more could I do to him? The fourth way in which fear can react to threats is fawn. And fawn is the phenomenon behind things like Stockholm syndrome. That's where captives, hostages, end up forming relationships with with their captors. They end up having, sort of befriending them, idolizing them, and respecting them as a power and as an authority. And fawn is a strategy or tactic that says, if I am under the knife of this individual, if this individual is threatening my life and my very existence is in their hands, do I want to be on their bad side or their good side? If you are in a family of foxes and you're a baby fox and a pack of wolves comes and ravages the den, and all your brothers and sisters are dead and your mother and father fox are dead, and the alpha comes for you, in that moment, you can't run away, you certainly can't fight, and you probably won't be able to play dead. So would it not be, as a final resort, would it not make sense to try to befriend the alpha? Maybe, just maybe, he'll adopt you. Maybe the wolf pack will adopt you. So this is actually also plays a role in why women stay in abusive relationships, and why it is that women will, and men, both, why we will remain in an abusive relationship. Because if someone is holding power and authority over us and is demonstrating their power and capacity to hurt us, to inflict pain upon us, to fawn after them and win them over and get into their good graces, is a viable strategy for survival and to maintain as much comfort and security as possible. Because for many individuals in abusive relationships, the fear of being alone is greater. It's the choice between the devil you know and the devil you don't. Because this person may be abusive to me, but I've gotten used to it. I know his ways. I know what he's like, and I know how to get on his good graces. I know how to push his buttons. I know how to stroke his ego. I know how to, so I can work within the confines of his madness and his anger and his idiosyncrasies and eccentricisms. But if I go out on my own, it's a big, wide world out there, and who knows what kind of crazies are out there that I'm going to have to start learning from the get-go, from ground zero. I'm going to have to learn all of their ways and get into their good graces and all this other stuff. Whereas this guy, so yeah, once in a while, he lets loose on me. Once in a while, he gets verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, possibly even physically abusive, but it's once in a while. The rest of the time, things are good, things are fine, we can manage. And besides, he's good looking and he's strong and he's this and he's that, and he will defend me from others. It's just that now and then he flies off the handle and takes his anger and frustration and this and that out on me. I'm his punching bag. That's fawn. So some of these can combine. Fight and flight, for instance. Fighting, and anyone who has ever studied martial arts knows that fighting is a dance between offense and defense. And defense is not just blocks, but it's avoidance. It's getting out of the way of your enemy's attacks. We mention this because sparring in martial arts teaches us in the allegory of the body, shows us what's going on in our psychology. And we don't just mean sparring with somebody else, but our own psychology sparring with us. So when we talk about mental gymnastics, it is more than useful to have in the back of your mind to visualize the many kung fu movies and like the Matrix, and in more modern times, but certainly from the 70s and so on, and the wire work of the Hong Kong kung fu movies of Jet Li and Jackie Chan, et cetera, et cetera. And you look at these incredible acrobatics that these martial artists do in order to defeat their opponent. But very often, the most engaging or exciting sequences are when the martial artist is surrounded and inundated by an army. They are beset upon all sides by adversaries. And one after another, they deflect, they dodge, they avoid, and they avoid getting hit, they avoid harm. This is sort of what's happening inside of us when we are beset upon by the truth. When that truth is overwhelming, when that truth is, it's so in our face. We're surrounded by it. We're so threatened by it. Our comfort, our security, our complacency, the status quo, our established identifications and attachments. And all of a sudden, our mind turns into Jackie Chan or Jet Li. And we're fighting off that comprehensive truth which is encroaching upon us and closing in. And we are at risk of having our bubble burst. So all of a sudden, our mind and our emotions, because our emotions get stirred, our mind leaps into action, and it becomes like a Jackie Chan. And it's jumping all over the place, and it's blocking, and it's deflecting, and it's punching back, and it's avoiding, and it's doing all of these mental gymnastics and leaping from one opponent to another, or from the stairs to the balcony to outside to the rooftop to the right, because those martial arts sequences always go very quickly. They move, not just through time but through space, but very quickly. So different scenery, right, to keep it always exciting and constant, but also to distract us and distract our to distract us from the truth. All of that sparring and fighting and mental gymnastics is really all about flight and getting away, of avoiding the truth altogether. But the truth is so overwhelming, we have to fight our way out of it. We have to survive and fight long enough to then escape and get away and live to fight another day. So, to use yet another allegory or an analogy, someone is coming and is disturbing your bubble. And immediately, your psychology reacts to that as if they are a threat, a credible threat, and that they are here not just to disturb the bubble, but burst it. So immediately inside the bubble, forces are set in motion to begin reinforcing the bubble and begin moving back and forth to get the bubble away from the threat, to avoid the disturbance and avoid the potential puncture of having the bubble burst altogether. Looked at it from these simple analogies and recognizing that the desire for comfort and security is primarily fear. But it gets a little complicated when the comfort and security that we have is related to our own self-image. Our beliefs about ourselves gets pulled into the mix. That's pride, self-image, and too much self-love, vanity. If the bubble that's being burst or is under threat relates to our own, the comfort and security that we have established for ourselves based around ideas and beliefs that we have about ourselves, then pride and fear are now working together to avoid and deflect and reinforce and get away from the truth. And this week, was a case of constant facing of individuals who including individuals in our own family. And that's maybe where we should start, because after all, when we are dealing with people who we have a very, very strong emotional connection with, or very strong energetic connection with, someone who is basically in our soul family, not just our biological family, but in our soul family, and that they are in our lives there for that sort of reason, to help our soul develop. We have a very powerful, deep, deep, deep connection. And because of that, a tremendous amount of energy is exchanged whenever we have an encounter with them. And because they are mirrors to us and they are karmically bound to us, many of our egos reflect one another, and we can very easily trigger one another. But when you have an individual in your family that you're trying to help and you're trying to convey information to them, which would be most helpful to them and would help alleviate their suffering, but they don't want to hear it. It is, and not because they know what they know, or they think they know what they know, or anything else. In this particular instant, this family member was attached to their suffering. They were attached to their anger and their resentment that was projected towards a computer company. For years, they had been suffering from this computer company's insistence that, and trying to push upon them and force upon them a certain way of using the device, a certain service associated with that computer company and that device. And with each progressive generation of software, that insistence became stronger and stronger. And that company kept trying to push and force this particular service upon my father. Now, my father doesn't like change, but he especially doesn't like cloud services and all that kind of stuff. He just wants his stuff on his computer and leave me alone. Well, it came to us to have to do something on that machine for our father, and we took it upon ourselves to, make some of these aggressive messages go away, so they stop harassing him all the time. And he said to us, he said, "Yeah, but they're going to come back. They always come back. They're going to come back." And he was very adamant about that. He knows they're going to come back. They're just going to come back. And we were trying to explain to him why they were coming back, and now the changes that we've made. And he didn't want to hear it. No, don't talk to me. Don't talk to me. They're going to come back. They're going to come back. That's all there is to it, and that's it. And in that moment, it became startlingly clear that at 83 years old, our father was attached to this particular hobby horse, this bugaboo. He was identified with it. He was attached to it. This is the way this company is. And he could not let go of it. He did not want to have that bubble burst. He did not want to be able to sit down in his computer and not be harassed. Because if his computer kept harassing him, then he could hit his fist or pump his fist and say, "This darn computer company, rah, 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 rah." He didn't want to let go of that. So he didn't want to hear it. What beliefs, what behaviors, what phenomena in our lives are we so attached to? What suffering do we subject ourselves to, which we have become so accustomed to, so habituated to, that they are part of our bubble, that they are part of our comfort and security, that they are part of our belief that we know what the world is like, that we know this computer company, we know the government, we know what the world is like, we know how things are and how things work. So that if someone comes and offers alternative information, or information which offers to release us from that anger and bitterness, or whatever form of suffering it is, we reject it. I don't want to hear it. Don't tell me. I don't want to hear it. I know what's what, and that's it. I'm used to it. That's it. I don't want to hear it. It's a difficult concept to wrap our heads around. But in a very real way, that's what individuals who suffer from substance addiction are facing with and dealing with every day. They're living with a demon, a self-sabotaging, self-destructive demon. They're drinking themselves or gambling themselves or fornicating themselves into oblivion. And yet, they cannot be helped until they what? They have to be able to stand up in a group of other addicts and raise their right hand or put their hand on their heart or whatever and solemnly declare, my name is so-and-so and I am an addict. In other words, they have to admit it to themselves. And they have to be held to account to that admission. Until they do that, they cannot be helped. Why? Because they're living in self-deception. They're living in self-deceit. Oh, I can handle it. Oh, I can handle my drugs. Oh, I can handle my gambling. Oh, I can go to Niagara Falls. Oh, I'm only going to take this much money with me. I'm only going to gamble what's in my pocket. 2 hours later, they're heading to the ATM. Or I'm going to go to the bar, but I'm only going to drink what's in my pocket. An hour later, and they're starting a tab. Or they're pulling out their credit card or whatever. They're deceiving themselves. Or rather, something inside of them is deceiving them. But that voice of deception, that voice of self-deception, that's why it's called self-deception, because it always presents itself as an I. Oh, I can handle this. Oh, I'm not addicted. I can quit whenever I want. I. There's a million of them. We've never been that kind of an addict, so we can't rhyme off all the excuses. But talk to an addict. Or anyone who's, well, an addict is an addict for life. So they'll tell you what the voices in their head and how those voices in their head rationalize and get them to do things and perpetuate the self-destructive, self-sabotaging addiction, self-deceit. And you talk about mental gymnastics. On the flip side of addiction, we could simply talk about habits and breaking habits and forming new habits. And if you've ever tried to be on a diet, for example, put yourself on a diet, or even tried fasting, and then carefully observed your mind and your emotions and your physical body, and observed the psychological gymnastics, the energetic, mental, and emotional gymnastics that your three brains will put you through while you're, going through withdrawal, so shall we say, when you are, for example, the first 8 to 12 hours of a fast. Um, on the point of addiction, Benjamin says, I've been to AA meetings and I can hear it in their voice. They're not being honest with themselves. But who am I to judge? Well, that's always a danger, right? That's always a danger, because if someone's modus operandi, if their status quo is lying to themselves, and they've been lying to themselves about their addiction for years, how are they all of a sudden going to flip the switch and be totally honest about that addiction? It's a relapse, falling off the wagon and falling back into addiction, and the cycle of getting clean and then falling back into our old ways. That's something that even the demon inside of us, the demon of addiction, can orchestrate. In other words, many people will end up in one of those meetings and the demon is going to play along. Yeah, sure. Sure, why not? I'll tell you what, let's get this AA stuff out of the way. Let's get it handled and dealt with so that we'll give you 3 months, 6 months clean. And then after, we're going to come at you and hit you really, really, really hard. You'll fall off the wagon and you'll be completely devastated. And the self-loathing will just come back with such a vengeance because you can't even get this right. And AA and the AA is just a bunch of BS. It can be very, very, very devastating. Someone who falls off the wagon, someone who has a relapse. They go through all this effort and all this struggle and all this suffering to climb out of their pit, to have a reprieve, a short reprieve, only to fall back in again, but they don't fall into the same pit. While they weren't looking, while they were busy climbing out of it, the demon was busy digging the pit deeper. So that when they fall back into it, they fall another 10 feet or 20 or 30 feet deeper into the pit. When we say self-deception and the egos behind it are insidious and clever and diabolical and malevolent, we are not using these words by accident, and we're not using these words as hyperbole. There's a reason why egos are called demons. There's no mincing words. This is their divinely ordained purpose, to cause us to fall, to cause us pain and suffering, to prevent us from achieving our destiny in life, and to prevent us from knowing ourselves. This is why they exist. And also to teach us about our own karma, to teach us our lessons, to hold a mirror up to ourselves, all of these things. They are the expressions of our worst self, the false self. And that's what they rule, and that's their job. And they are the adversary, the shaitan, which we must conquer. But as a martial arts opponent, you will find none better, more clever, more subtle, faster, quicker to defeat the adversary is tremendous. And we know how difficult an adversary they are because we visualize what happens when that adversary is confronted by the all-encompassing, comprehensive nature of objective reality. And then, boom, the adversary turns into Jackie Chan. And we can observe this in ourselves. And even if we are at a level where we don't react that way anymore, we can observe it in others. And when you're trying to have a discussion with someone or a conversation with someone, and you're watching their locus of concentration and attention bounce around, like, it is phenomenal the way in which Again, the mental gymnastics that is taking place inside of them, which is preventing them from focusing long enough to actually hear what it is you're saying. Or they'll hear a little snippet of it, and as soon as they hear that snippet, boom, they're onto something else. We had an extensive conversation with someone very recently, and this individual was relaying to us an event in their life in which they were delivering a message to somebody, and this somebody that they were delivering a message to had asked them, if you hear anything, please do let me know. I'll greatly appreciate it. So this individual heard something. This individual brought that information, what they heard, to the person who had asked for it. And the reward for doing what this person had asked is this person immediately lashed out at them and immediately went on the attack, because the best defense is a good offense, right? This is the foundation of the shoot the messenger phenomenon. If I can deflect the entire conversation, put it back on the messenger and make it about them, then my bubble will be safe and secure. And so my fear very quickly turns to anger, and my pride turns to anger. And now anger, we unleash anger on the messenger, like crying havoc and letting slip the dogs of war, right? So fear and pride are safe and sound inside the bubble, and they get anger to do their dirty work, to go and attack the person who's threatening the bubble. Like sicking the pit bulls, right? On the postman or on the delivery man coming to the house. And the delivery man just, backs away. But interestingly, the individual that we had the conversation with, the one who delivered the message, the one who was attacked, when we talked to them, they were very distraught. They were very, very upset. And they were upset because, how dare he do that to me? When he asked me to deliver the message, and how dare he do that to me? Nobody does that to me. This individual had spent a lifetime experiencing abuse by others. And this was another in a long series of encounters in which they were being abused, in their mind, unfairly and unjustly. And in the course of this conversation, this individual revealed to us that they would be doing things that will be torturing that other individual, and that they will get their justice, they will get their comeuppance. And when we called them out on that, they said, "Oh, no," like without being able to recount and recall the entire conversation in specifics, because we're being very vague, because to protect the identities of everyone involved, number one. And number two, we're not saying any of this to be a gossip, but the conversation with this individual was absolutely it was so revealing, because of the way in which this individual could say one thing and then admit to something, and then 3 to 5 minutes later, because they were going on a rant, they were very upset, they were very emotional. If we called them out on that thing, they would immediately deny that they ever said that. And many times when we were speaking to them, and trying to help them and explain the metaphysical phenomena of what was going on in this encounter, where she was the messenger who was being shot. Anytime we got within a hair's breadth of being able to deliver some nugget of truth, she immediately would react and send the conversation off on a tangent, like something popped into her head and would come out of would come out of their mouth, and it would be a tangent, and it would be now like evading, avoiding, deflecting, sending the conversation on a completely different path. Anything to avoid facing and confronting the reality. And what was the reality? Well, this individual had gone through a lifetime of encounters like this, of being, quote, abused by others. And so much so that this little episode of her trying to deliver some information to someone and his reacting poorly and shooting the messenger caused her entire day to collapse into a tailspin, into a downward spiral of anger and resentment and frustration and agitation. She was completely consumed by it. And when we confronted with all of that pain and suffering and all of the rationalizations and justifications about how right she was and how justified she was in feeling that way, and how wrong the other individual was, and how could he do that to her and cause her this much as pain and suffering, when we attempted to enlighten her on what was really going on, which was her own expectations, her own fears, her own pride, were deceiving her, that they were what were responsible for all of her anger and resentment, and that these entities inside of her were what keep attracting people into her life to so-called abuse her. Because it's in those circumstances that these entities get triggered and come to the surface. And she was wholly and completely identified with them. It was I, me. How dare he do this to me? The voices of the entities were speaking through the individual. And the individual was oblivious. Or, if we called them out on it, we asked them, do you hear yourself? Do you hear yourself speaking? Do you know that you just said ABC? And they would go, no, I didn't. Or, no, yeah, I know. But still, I'm going to do it. It was a sight to behold. It was such an illuminating exercise in what comes to mind is a cartoon in which the mother is trying to feed the baby with a spoon, and the baby is just right, and the mother is trying to get the spoon in the baby's mouth, and the baby's doing everything to prevent the mother from getting the food in its mouth, and the food is going everywhere, all over the baby's face, all over the baby's bib, all over the kitchen, everywhere. The baby food is going everywhere, except in the baby's mouth. That's what the conversation with this individual was like yesterday. Now, of course, the challenge for ourselves was to remain calm and relaxed and not get roped into this drama and not get sucked into the martial arts match. And we very quickly shifted tactics anyway to planting seeds, or sort of baiting the hook, tossing the hook in the water, and kind of teasing the truth out of them. So you lob the bait and the hook into the water, and then you wait, and then you kind of slowly bring the lure back in, right? And that lures the fish, right, to the hook. So that's what we had to do with this individual, because there was no way they were going to take a direct hearing of the truth. There's no way. All we could do is try to prick their conscience and ask a question and toss that lure deep and far into the lake, and then slowly tease the fish, the big truth, and or the big lie out of them, so it came out of their own mouth. The problem was this individual was oblivious to what they themselves were saying. Which brings us to the obvious practical implication of all of this. In order to know if we are deceiving ourselves or not, or rather, if we are being deceived by our own egos, fear, pride, mostly, but also if we have addictions, right? The demon of addiction. But again, addiction is self-loathing. So really that's the demon of pride, because self-loathing is pride. Because that ego of pride doesn't care if we love ourselves too much or we hate ourselves, right? That's the two sides of that coin. In the same way that fear wants its comfort and security, but also the other side of that coin is it wants to control others. It wants to sabotage other people's comfort and security. Why? Because by controlling others, fear gains more, a greater sense of comfort and security with that control, by controlling others. If I can control others and all my circumstances around me, I'm creating this buffer zone. I'm surrounding myself with yes men. Surrounding myself with yes men means I only ever hear what I want to hear. That's my comfort and security, my sense of self, my own little world, my little bubble. I'm reinforcing that bubble, or I'm making the bubble bigger, or I'm putting the bubble inside of another bubble. You can work with whatever visualization helps you comprehend the psychological country within yourself. So how do we know that this is taking place inside of ourselves? How do we know when we are being subjected to this kind of self-deception and self-sabotage? The answer is, how do you go about knowing anything without first observing? You cannot know a phenomenon without observing it. And more than just observing it, investigating it, analyzing what you observe. Observing it is fine. Observing is the first step. But then investigating it, analyzing it, noting the connections between the phenomena and other phenomena. observing the cause and effect relationships between phenomena or between events and circumstances and that phenomena. And if we're talking about self-deception, that means we're talking about self-observation. Clearly, the individual that we were speaking to yesterday, who was oblivious to what they themselves were saying from one moment to the other, such that they would say one thing and 2 or 3 minutes later they would say the exact opposite, or they would deny having said the first thing, or they would it was completely disjointed and disconnected. And many times we had to ask them, do you hear what you're saying? And then we would ask them, okay, so what you just said, was that coming from your innermost, or was that coming from your ego? And then they would have to concede, oh, yes, of course, you're right. Of course, whatever. But I'm still right. I'm still justified. When we say self-observation, and when we emphasize how important it is, self-observation is to us what real-time malware protection is to your computer. Something which runs 24 hours a day, or at least if your computer is on, your real-time malware protection is on. Antivirus, anti-malware, anti-phishing, firewall, all of these aspects. And they're monitoring and they're looking and they're waiting for intrusion, for intruders, for threats that are trying to take control of your operating system, that are trying to gain access to information, passwords, anything of value. But trying to take control of your computer. That's what viruses and malware do. And try to act on your behalf without your knowledge. Without these tools, without that real-time monitoring, malware and spyware and even hackers, right? Other actors, bad actors, can come gain access to your system and take control. And before you know it, your computer is being used to send out spam messages to a mailing list of 500,000 people or 1 million people. And when the authorities track back on the IP, the origin of the spam, or your computer is sending out malware, your computer is running phishing scams. And when the authorities track back the IP address of where the phishing scam or the malware or the spam is coming from, next thing you know, you're getting a knock at the door because your computer was hijacked because you weren't running real-time malware protection and a firewall and all the other real-time tools required to prevent your system being taken over by bad actors and malevolent AI. And that's what our egos and demons are. They're bad actors and malevolent AI, and they're just taking control of our system. And this individual was wholly taken over and was oblivious to it. Even in her anger and frustration and everything else, they were incapable of fully processing and appreciating the state in which they were in and the causes of that state. They were so fixated on blaming the other individual involved. Their attention, their focus, and everything was directed out there, that they weren't observing themselves. And when we are angry, when we are disturbed, when we are upset, when we are stressed, when our peace and equanimity is distressed, these are the moments when it is most important for us to observe ourselves. Because these are the times when it is our greatest opportunity, our best opportunity to get a good glimpse at the demons that we still have to face and overcome inside of ourselves. When they come to the surface, when they show themselves, when they reveal themselves, they're out in the open and they're taking over the system. In other words, we should be running the real-time virus scanning all the time, but when something fishy happens, or when our computer goes on the fritz, or something clearly is not right, that's when we do a real-time full system scan. Because something got through the safety net, something got through the firewall, and it's starting to mess up the system, and I'm starting to lose control of my own system. That's when I especially need to take a deep breath, pause, and back away, and do a full system scan. What is going on? What is in control of me right now? And you hear all the voices in your head. I'm justified. I'm rationalized. How dare they? Da 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 blah blah blah. You don't identify with those. Don't, because when you identify with them and you become attached to those voices, they become attached to you. The causes, the sources of those voices. It's you're like inviting the computer virus in, and you're saying, "Here's the root directory. Come on in," or you're inviting the hacker in. That ego is using pain and suffering to knock at the door. And announcing itself as, I am your pain, I am your suffering, I'm going to help you, I'm going to get you satisfaction, I'm going to make you feel good, I'm going to get you your vengeance, I'm going to get you your justice. And you hear that and you go, hot dog, and you open the door and you let them right in. What comes to mind is the Saturday Night Live skit from the late 70s, early 80s, after Jaws came out. And they had the skit where they would play the Jaws music, and then you would hear a knock at the door of the apartment, and someone would say, "Who is it?" And you would, on the other side of the door, you hear, "Candyman." And the woman would say, "No, no, no, I know you. You're that clever shark." Telegram. If you're familiar with the skit, you know what I'm talking about. It's the ways in which our egos get to us and get us to open that door and come in and have their way with us are infinite. We would have to devote the rest of our lives just to try to categorize and catalog all the different strategies and tactics and methods and lies and deceptions and half-truths or quarter truths or three-quarter truths or 9/10 truths. If you want to talk about subtlety, our egos will, because it is about, we know this about egos, about ourselves, just observing ourselves, but also observing pets or children. Have you ever noticed that pets and children always push the boundaries? They always see what they can get away with, how much they can get away with. They're always testing those boundaries, those limits. And our egos do the same thing. Just how far can they take their lie with us, their self-deception? Can they take it to where it's 50% deception? How about 40%? How about 30? How about 20? How about 10? You're testing the limits. And self-deception, where 90% of what we're being told, what we're telling ourselves via our egos, 90% true and 10% false. But that 10% false is enough for us to deceive ourselves, for us to be deceived by our own egos. And the arrogance that starts to come out in situations like that, because when you have 90% truth, boy, does it feels like, it feels like it's the truth at that point, because you have to have a very fine amount of discernment to be able to tell the difference between 90% truth and the whole truth. Right? Do you see that? That discernment is what's key here. And as we develop, and as we progress along the path, and as we develop more and more discernment, the egos have to become more and more subtle. They have to become more and more clever. The more we develop, the more discernment, the more discernment we develop, and the more consciousness, the more conscious we become, the more subtle and clever and skillful our demons become, our egos. The analogy here, which is very powerful, is the analogy of video games and the dungeon crawling type video games, or the role-playing games, where the monsters on the first levels are pretty easy, and as you get deeper and deeper and deeper into the game, and further into the game, you go into deeper and deeper levels of the dungeon, and the monsters get harder. Well, they have to get harder because your character is getting better, and you are getting better at the game. So as you're playing a game, the levels get more and more difficult the further into the game you become, because the game matches where you are as a player. And then, of course, most, if not all, games have some kind of a final challenge or final boss, which is the most difficult challenge in the game. But by the time you face that boss, the game should have prepared you for that challenge. So there's always a kind of equilibrium or only slight discrepancy between our level of being and the obstacles, the adversary that we are opposing at any given time. But we must be aware of this. And self-deception and the mental gymnastics and all the rest of it that we have been describing, we have to comprehend that the more we feel like we are immune to self-deception, the more subtle and more clever and more skillful the causes of self-deception are becoming or have become. Because if you tell yourself that you're free and liberated of self-deception, and, oh, I don't deceive myself, guess what? That's self-deception. If you're telling yourself that you don't need to listen to this lecture, you don't need to take it seriously because you're immune to this, that happens to other people, but that's not me, guess what? You're deceiving yourself. And that may be a hard truth to swallow. And that may be a truth that you want to avoid and evade and say, no, that's wrong. That's not me. And you might go through a whole bunch of mental gymnastics and rationalizations and justifications to get you to reinforce and reassert that for yourself and reconvince yourself that you're not being deceived. But if you observe yourself and you observe that process, you will discover that that process is the very process of self-deception that we've been talking about. So just let it happen. Don't avoid it. Don't try to stifle it. Don't try to shut it down and shut it out. Don't allow some sort of mystic pride and self-righteous cognitive dissonance to get in the way, because that too is a subtle and clever avoidance. That too is a subtle and clever self-deception. So allow the thoughts to come up, allow the mental gymnastics to take place, but observe them and then meditate. Meditate on the experience, meditate on them. Use your available free consciousness to analyze and contemplate and play out and say, oh, and just watch and re-witness all the clever mental gymnastics, like watching a Jackie Chan movie in slow motion. This is not an intellectual exercise. It is a conscious exercise. And observe and marvel at the agility, at the skill, at the timing, at the choreography, at all of it. Just marvel at it. Allow the wonder of the skill, the speed, the agility of our adversary and study it, because that's our adversary. And if you want to defeat an adversary, you got to know their ways. You got to know their tactics or strategies. You have to know what it is you are up against. As Sun Tzu said, you must know your enemy. You must know yourself even more. In the case of the path of awakening the consciousness and self-realization of the being, the adversary is the self. The adversary is the mind. And there's only one way to know your mind. You must observe it. And this is a very helpful phenomenon, especially if what comes to mind tends to come out of your mouth. And that when you're angry and agitated, if you say whatever comes to mind and you blurt something out and it comes out of your mouth, that's potentially very useful and very helpful in terms of self-observation. Might not be so helpful in terms of your other relationships. But observing what you say and how you say it is a tremendously useful and powerful aspect of self-observation, because because words have power and meaning. And if something comes out of your mouth and you go, what? And you're observing that and you're like, where did that come from? And did I say that? Or I didn't mean to say that, or I didn't want to say that. Where did it come from? Or something comes out of your mouth and you go, and you're taken aback and you go, wow, how did that come from me? I didn't say that. I don't know that. Because sometimes it's coming from your egos, and sometimes it's coming from your innermost. Remember the cartoons when we were kids? Remember the little angel and the little demon whispering in our ear? Well, sometimes, especially when we're agitated, the angels and demons are like yelling at each other, for lack of a better expression. And sometimes it's coming out of our own mouth. Minx says sometimes when it leaves your mouth, it's too late. It may be too late from the perspective of the relationship that or the discussion or argument that you are in, but it's never too late to observe what comes out of your mouth. And that's what today's talk is about. How to deal with self-deception, how to deal with the causes of things within you causing you another suffering. So what is it that made that thing come out of my mouth? Well, I can look at what came out of my mouth if I'm observing what came out of my mouth and go, oh, I didn't want to say that. I didn't mean to say that. I would never say that. What the hell said that? Later, the end of the day, in meditation, you replay these circumstances in meditation. You replay that moment of that when those words came out of your mouth. How are you feeling? What were you thinking? What was the state of your body? Were you agitated? Were you relaxed? Were you stressed? Where was the stress in your body? If you are observing your 3 brains and 5 centers, practicing self-observation, when those words come out of your mouth, you're not only going to hear them and hear those words and observe those words, you're also going to be observing your mental state, your emotional state, and your motor, physical, sexual state. So that in meditation later on, you can contemplate and observe all of these things comprehensively in consciousness, and the synthesis. You avail yourself to the synthesis, to the comprehensive truth of the situation, and say, that was my pride, or that was my fear, and it was getting me all worked up. And if you do this over and over and over again with practice, with experience, you begin to see patterns emerging. You begin to see signs emerging. So, for example, in our case, the muscles in our legs and in our buttocks will tense up every time we're in an argument or a discussion and it's getting heated and our fear is being triggered and our desire to control the outcome. And so now we are at a point where if those muscles start tensing up and we're in observation and we're observing ourselves and we can feel that, we know that the demon is coming and the demon wants to get in on this conversation. And we can observe that and we can watch it. It doesn't mean that we immediately relax it and make it go away. No, we want to see what it has to say. We'll let it get as far as getting the thought into our head. We'll say, okay, you thought you were going to get me to blurt that out, did you? Then it's not too late. But if you just keep pushing it down and suppressing it at an early stage, then you're just pushing that demon down. You're not getting yourself any closer to comprehending it and comprehending its ways. We have some chats and some questions, and they've been piling up, so we better get at some of them. Benjamin says, we are only in control of our mind, consciousness, heart, and will, but the other 4 senses, they're pretty much on their own. Many of the emotions that we have and thoughts that we have, we're not in control of. They bubble up. And we need to observe them, and we need to get at their source. Figure out what is the cause of these thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and also sensations. Because sensations in the body, likewise, many of them are caused by egos. Azazel, yeah, they definitely become very clever and annoyingly clever. Yeah, anybody who's been doing this work for any length of time realizes that activities like meditation doesn't become easier. Meditation becomes harder if you're doing it right. Just like a video game. Now, when we say that, it doesn't mean that what we're saying is meditation becomes less effective. No, it just becomes harder. But guess what? It's harder because you're getting better at it. It doesn't mean that you can't do it. It doesn't mean that you no longer are able to do it because it becomes too hard. No. It becomes harder because you're getting to deeper levels. It becomes more challenging. In the same way that climbing a mountain is relatively easy at the bottom, and as you get closer and closer and closer to the peak, it becomes harder and harder and harder. Mink says, pride and fear leading to anger will ruin your life, and then you're a demon dwelling in hell. Our egos can ruin our lives and hurt the ones we love most. One moment of self-forgetfulness, of not observing myself, can mount up and lead us so far away from ourselves, only to, at some point, wake up to what we have done. Hard truth to see, I am nothing but a child. Well, wise and humble words. But the beauty about self-observation and this practice whereby we can liberate ourselves from the causes of our self-deception is in conventional magic. And we're now referring to stage magic, right? Las Vegas magic, Siegfried and Roy magic, Penn and Teller magic. They're called tricks. They're called magic tricks. And what's the key to not being fooled, not being tricked? In fact, Penn and Teller has a show, had a TV show. I'm not sure if it's still on television, but they had a TV show, and there are many, many, many vignettes on YouTube. They had a TV show called Fool Us, and they were inviting magicians onto their stage to perform a trick that they Penn and Teller wouldn't be able to figure out. And that's the key to conventional magic, is that once you know the trick, you can't be fooled by that trick anymore. You know the trick. So the tricks that our egos play on us, the deceptions, they get us to believe one thing, which is very different from reality. Like magicians get us to believe that they make things disappear by blowing on them, or they make things teleport from one hand to another, or all the different magic tricks that you've seen in your life. They're not real magic, they're illusions. And in order for you to be able to see through the illusion, you have to see the trick. What is the technique? What is the unique trick that the magician, the illusionist, is using to make the illusion seem real? What is the trick behind the deception? And once you see that, you begin to know the ways of that ego, the ways of that deceiver, of that illusionist. And so once you know its ways, it can't trick you that way anymore. But it doesn't give up the fight. It becomes a better magician. It becomes a better illusionist. It becomes more subtle and more clever, with more subtle and more clever tricks. But if we're on the path and we know that this is what they're doing, and we know this is how they're proceeding, and we know that the longer I play the video game, the harder it's going to get, we know that it's just a game. It's just an illusion, no matter what fear throws in my face. I'm never to identify with it. I'm never to become attached with it. No matter what my mind throws at me, I'm never to identify with it. I'm never to attach myself to it. It's always provisional, except in those cases when we feel it in our heart and we know it like we know it, like we know it, because it's coming from our innermost being. It's not in the mind. Sometimes the innermost being will use the mind as a tool and put stuff into our mind. But always, always, it'll be accompanied by the still soft voice in the heart, the voice of intuition, the voice, the profound feelings of inspiration, of imagination. And it's through discernment that we know the difference between the two. And that way, we can tell that when things are just coming from our mind on their own versus things that are coming from our true self, our innermost. And this way, even though we can still have egos, and even though those egos will be trying to deceive us, we will become all but immune. Not free of, not, oh, I don't have to worry about that, but protected, immune, because we are observing ourselves. We've developed a psychological conscious immune system, a psychological conscious anti-malware suite that we're running 24 hours a day to protect our operating system from the malware and the bad actors, the hackers. Benjamin says, the process of observant the light of intelligence, and where is the thought focused at or focusing? And Jamie says, hello, Attlas. Random question. Is it necessary to be a part of a Gnostic group or to be a missionary in order to walk the path of the initiation? Jamie, just by the nature of your question, we intuit, or we deduce that you've recently had an encounter with AGEAC, AGEAC, or one of their affiliates. No, it is not necessary to be a Gnostic missionary in the strict or official sense. Is it necessary to be part of a Gnostic group? It's beneficial if the Gnostic group is genuine, and if it is available to you and local to you, and is practical for you to be able to join it. It is beneficial to be a part of a Gnostic group. There are benefits to that. Is it absolutely necessary? No. We have not been a member of a Gnostic group now for, 10 years? Something like that. But we were a member of one, and while we were a member of one, it was of tremendous benefit. However, we also had an intimate relationship with a Gnostic missionary who worked for AGEAC. And her and her AGEAC friends, who also were Gnostic missionaries at AGEAC, for lack of a better expression, rejected us. They were threatened and afraid by, and I'm going to quote here, by a kind of gnosis that I never knew it could exist, that I never knew existed and couldn't imagine myself attaining, or something to that effect. She also said that she was married to AGEAC, and that AGEAC was her first love, and that where I'm going, she cannot follow. So the only reason why we bring this up is because you use the word missionary in your question. We have had our run-ins with Gnostic groups and Gnostic schools. And all we can say is, as we've been trying to point out in today's talk, self-deception, no one is ever free from self-deception. And it takes so many different forms and can express in so many different ways. And hypocrisy and fanaticism. Fanaticism is just another kind of addiction. It's a mental addiction, and emotional addiction. But it's also identification. It's also an identification and an attachment and an inability for somebody to let go of their dogma or their identification with a particular group or whatever. These are all very real hindrances and obstacles that the ego places for us on the path, and mystic pride. And many members of Gnostic groups will develop a mystic pride because they are the chosen ones. They are the initiates. They have access to the secret teachings and the secret rites and the secret rituals. So there are benefits to being in a good group and a good school, but be aware. Go in with your eyes open. And we cannot afford to be naive. The Black Lodge is everywhere, and it's in everyone in this day and age. And it's not that we have to be cynical and skeptical. We just need to be aware and awake and calm and relaxed, and recognize that everyone, we're only human in that sense, right? We're all flawed. We're all fallible, and not to put too much stock in any one person or group or teaching or anything. And if you do not have access to a school, if you do not have access to a group, relax. There are more than enough resources online. There are enough lectures and material on glorian.org to keep you occupied for the next 5 years. And they even reveal how to do things like do your own unction in your house. In other words, how to bless unleavened bread and water and grape juice in your home, so that you can recreate the rite of the Holy Unction and replay the ritual of the Last Supper, even by yourself. Just you and your innermost being and the Logos and your Divine Mother, and have a solemn, sacred rite of communion, of Holy Communion with the Holy Spirit through the body of the Divine Mother, and have those two united in the Christ, in the Logos within you. This is my body, which will be given up for you. This is my blood. This is the cup of the new and everlasting covenant. It will be shed for you and for all. So the details on how to go about doing that, it's all online. And it's also in Master Samael's books. So if you do not have access to a school, if you do not have access to a group, there is a way, there is a path for you. And just relax and just walk whatever is available to you. Dharmakaya says, love your content, brother. It is really helping me. A fool trying to walk the path of initiation. You keep me motivated to keep working. Deepest love and gratitude to you. It is our honor and privilege. It is our honor and privilege, Dharmakaya, and it warms our heart, and words like yours motivate us to keep going and keep doing what we are here to do. All right. As Azazel says, there are enough information there for lifetimes, basically, to be comprehended. Yeah. It would take you, we don't know how long it would take you to actually get through the material, but Azazel is correct. It would take you lifetimes to actually comprehend the full significance of the material there. We're just trying to get it. Well, we don't want to say to someone, it's going to take you lifetimes to read it all. because we don't want to overwhelm anyone either. But there is plenty of there, and there are also lectures on how to begin and where to begin. There's a whole series in that website called Introductory Information, and that's where you can begin. Mink says, how do I go on with life when there is no greater pain than waking up again after having descended in consciousness, ego mind, borderline splitting, to having ruined your own life and how it must have been for your loved one? There is no greater pain than losing grip on who you are and reality. And for the ones you love and who loved you to witness this descent into mental illness and self-deception, how can I ever live up to that regret, shame, and guilt? There are several universal truths which we can take heart in. The first one is what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And if you're familiar with any type of weightlifting or bodybuilding or sparring or any type of physical activity, or even learning the piano, or or any type of skill, that failure is part of the development process. And to quote a contemporary series of films, we can go to the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy, where the entire theme of the trilogy is falling and climbing back out, getting back up. Why do we fall, sir? So we can get ourselves back up again. And in the third film in the trilogy, The Batman Rises, Batman Rises is all about that. The Dark Knight Rises, to the point where Bruce Wayne is thrown into this pit of terrible suffering, because there's no bars on it. It's just this pit and the worst thing about it is that there's hope. You can see the sky, gives you hope that you might be able to get out, but every time you try, you just come crashing down. You fail. And in that film, it's Bruce Wayne's fear that he has to overcome in order to escape the pit. He has to make the leap of faith without the rope. His back broken, his city lost and under siege, his faith and trust in others betrayed, tossed away and thrown away like so much garbage into a pit of hell on earth, a back broken, and a television to watch the fruits of his failure. The second thing we will say is that, of course, he makes it out. And if you've seen the film, you know how it ends. But the second thing that we can take hope in is that our Divine Mother orchestrates all of our tests and our trials and ordeals, and that because karma is intelligently managed, all of our egos, the demons that we have inside that form our individual shaitan, the adversary, our individual Satan, who we combat, the legion of monsters, demons that we have to overcome within ourselves. That's all managed and all arranged and orchestrated by our individual Divine Mother. And she never, ever dishes out more than we can handle. It might feel like we can't handle it. We might feel like we're overwhelmed. We might feel like things are hopeless. But guess what? Those are just egos in our mind deceiving us. But that's the self-deception, the negative talk, the negative self-talk. Oh, it's a hopeless. Oh, I'm a failure. I'm a loser. Oh my gosh, it's hopeless. I always mess things up. I'm a terrible person, and on and on and on and on and on and on and go, berating ourselves, putting ourselves down, or shaking our fist at the heavens, or whatever. That's all self-deception. All that negative self-talk. Do you think that's coming from your innermost being? Do you think that's coming from your divine mother, who's pure love, who furnishes us with all we need on the path? You think that she's the one berating you? Then why are you attaching yourselves to those voices? Why are you allowing that negative self-talk to reign? Why are you looking at reality and subjectively judging it as hopeless, when you should know deep down that there is always hope, there is always a way, there is always a path out of hell? Redemption is a door which is closed to no one. No one is beyond redemption. No one. So take heart in that. Take heart in the fact that the loved ones around you, the people that you may have hurt, the people who may have suffered because of your choices, your path, your suffering, the suffering that you went through inadvertently led to the suffering of others, the suffering of people whom you love. Try to comprehend that their suffering is theirs, not yours. It's their reactions to your suffering that cause them suffering. And their suffering is part of their journey, just as your suffering is part of your path and your journey out of suffering. So just as in our case, well, we're going to take this text off the screen now because it's, in our case, we have had this lifetime, 49 years, in a family in which we're the black sheep, and nobody can understand what the hell we are and what it is that we're doing. And all they can do is point to what we're not doing, which is not taking their advice and not doing what they're telling us we should do, and not getting out and getting a job and doing this and having a career and finding a wife and getting married and blah, blah, blah. And, having a house and a mortgage and 2 cars and 2 kids and all the rest of it, right? All that worldly success, which they think is so important. And they think that we're suffering so terribly because we don't have any of it. And that they're suffering on our behalf, and they're worried for us, and they're concerned about us, and that we're somehow ruining their lives because of this. No, they have a choice. They have a choice to accept us as we are, respect us for who we are and why we're here, and actually try to really get to know us, to really listen and really try to comprehend. Because if they did that, they would say, oh, well, that's pretty important what you're doing. And that sounds pretty worthwhile. That seems like a worthwhile pursuit for a life. Maybe, maybe I'll support you in that. And don't get me wrong, they do. They do. Even if on the surface they may bitch and complain and say what they will to each other behind our back, the fact of the matter is that our biological family never abandoned us. And we have and most of the loved ones that we have in our life won't, even though we bring them suffering and they suffer because of what we're going through, et cetera, et cetera. So everything happens for a reason. There's rhyme and reason to everything under the sun, including you, the way you are, everything that you've gone through, everything that you have yet to go through. And that destiny, that potential, that light at the end of the tunnel, which calls to you, which beckons you to continue forward, fumbling through the dark, to have faith, to trust that inner, still, soft voice. And remember always your innermost intimate divine mother. And we just shared a link in the chat to our article about the divine mother. She is the way. She is the one putting down the breadcrumbs, leading you through the dark wood and out of the dark wood. Put your faith and trust in her. Remember her. Pray to her. As we'll just Minx describes, thank you so much, Attlas, especially for the last part about the door of redemption not being closed, and that it is the ego's telling it is too much. Suicide would be the triumph of Satan. Yes, correct. In fact, suicide is laziness. All the egos will gang up on you and beat you up and get you to beat yourself up through a tremendous barrage of self-deception. Truly. And when you are completely exhausted, completely beaten down, completely defeated, laziness will come to you as your savior with an exit strategy. A bottle of pills, a tall building, a loaded gun. And laziness will say to you, don't worry, it'll be painless and you'll be free. Self-deception. Azazel says, it's like the Greek god Moros, the god of impending doom. Yes, well, there you go. And where the word comes from, no doubt, morose, to feel morose, and to something that to be that way, like that nothing's going to work out. To be morose means we're all doomed. There's no hope, hopelessness. Benjamin Ochoa says, there's a chapter just dedicated on the descent of ourself into ego. Our karma seems like it remains at the top of the list. So the descent into hell is part of the comprehension of Jacob's ladder and Dante's ladder. We've discussed this many times. And the perfect contemporary allegory to this is Dungeons and Dragons and the role-playing game, where you descend into levels and levels and levels and levels and levels of the dungeon. And the deeper you go, the harder the monsters get. And every time you kill a monster, you get more experience points and more treasure. You're getting your consciousness back, but you're also generating experience. And every time you get a certain amount of experience, you go up a level. So you're going deeper in levels of the dungeon, but as you do so, you're leveling up your character and you're recovering treasure. This is how it works. It's the alm of life, to go around and around and around in the spiral, right? On the expanding spiral. In order to get to the next higher level, you have to go to the next deeper level. And then you go up, and then you go to the next higher level, and then you go to the next deeper level. Just take your finger and draw, or a pen, and draw a growing spiral. That's the alm of life. That's your path. You cannot get to the next level if what you have to work with is a spiral. You cannot get to the next level without first going down. When you're drawing a spiral, that's the only way it works. So the deeper in hell that you are or have been, the greater the exaltation, the greater the reward. Even Master Samael said, every exaltation is preceded by a great humiliation. It's just the way it works. And what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Does anybody have any other questions or any comments or anything to share regarding this topic of self-deception? We encourage you to, as always, observe yourself. Pay attention. Observe the ways that your mind deceives you or is trying to deceive you. Question it. And also, pay attention to the people around you, to the interactions you have with them, to how they react to what you know to be the truth. If you're trying to have a conversation or an exchange with someone online, for example, and observe the way, the mental gymnastics that they do, this will help you identify when those mental gymnastics are playing out in your own mind, in your own psyche. You'll say, oh, wait, I've seen this before. And when it was happening with somebody else, they couldn't see it, but I could see it. Now it's happening inside of me. I bet you there are people around me who can see it, but I can't see it. This is subtle. This is clever. But the more experience you have observing not just the 3D universe, but the 4D and 5D reality as best as you can, and you live in a field of energy and a field of vibration, and you begin to see, right, the mental gymnastics, you begin to see the egos working in others. And the more you do that without judgment and without mystic pride, without self-right, you don't do this self-righteously. Oh, look at those these sleeping zombies. I'm awake, right? You don't do any of that. You look with humility and compassion. And then you can, in meditation, especially in cases where you are confronted by someone who is exhibiting cognitive dissonance, self-deception, self-sabotaging behavior, and you have an exchange with them. And later in meditation, it is important to do a retrospection on that exchange, because in meditation, you want to pray to your innermost and your Divine Mother to show you what it is you need to learn from that exchange. And if that exchange, that circumstance, that encounter, possibly an argument or whatever the case may be, it is very likely what you're identifying in that other person, it's very likely they are a mirror to you in some way. They are mirroring you. Now, they might be at a different level, But the phenomena that's being triggered, that's coming to the surface, and you observe yourself. If you observe the frustration, if you observe stress, observe yourself, that somehow you are also being disturbed. Your peace is also being disturbed. In meditation, in retrospection, you want to recollect and retrospect on that exchange and ask and pray your Divine Mother to reveal, to show you what it is you're missing, what it is you need, what's your takeaway, because everything happens for a reason. And it's not just that they came into your life so that you could educate them about something and, oh, they had cognitive dissonance and they're deceiving themselves and they're being difficult and stonewalling me. And blah, 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 what an ignorant zombie. To hell with you. I'm done. I'm finished casting pearls before swine. And you walk away self-righteously with indignation. Does that sound like the takeaway that your Divine Mother or your innermost being planned for you to take away from that encounter? There's a great deal to be said for humility and compassion. And yes, while it is true we need wisdom and we need to know when not to cast pearls before swine, and all of that is true. But it is also true that we must learn how to govern our emotions and our mind and master it, so that, and it is important that we do not fall into the same trap of self-deception, albeit more subtle. But as we said, the more progress we make, the more difficult our adversary becomes, and the more subtle and more clever and insidious the adversary becomes. So we must never become complacent, and we must never fall for that self-deception where you say, aha, I'm finished. I'm at such and such a level. I've done all the work that I need to do. I don't need to worry about this anymore. No. You don't need to worry about it. Don't worry about it. That's just fear. But don't kid yourself. Don't fall for that self-deception. You're not a self-realized master yet. None of us are. So let us go forth with clarity, with honesty, with ourselves, as much as with others. And let us not deceive others, and let us not allow ourselves to be deceived, be it by others, but also in the context of today's talk, by ourselves. One last call for questions or comments. Aisling Joy says, I look forward to your live streams every week and for the guidance and inspiration they provide. I would be lost in much confusion without them. Thank you for your efforts in offering your time and wisdom to us all. It is our honor and our privilege, Aisling. We appreciate you, and we are humbled by your words, and we hope you will continue to join us and find value in our work. Anyone else? Anything else? If not, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. Again, we hope to see you all again next week. And until then, God bless and inverential peace.